Ishar acknowledges the Wajak Noongar people as the traditional owners of the land on which we provide our services. We continue to recognize and celebrate the spiritual connections that Noongar people have to this country and waters, and pay tribute to Noongar elders past, present and emerging. This morning's agenda includes 2 keynote speakers from different service providers and 1 lived experience speaker. We will open the floor for questions at the end of this session. So please prepare your questions as we move throughout this event. We'll start off with our keynote speaker, and I happen to know this amazing person personally. And that keynote speaker is Dr. Carol Kaplanyan. Carol has a PhD in honor-based violence, a BA and MA in social work, and received the Grace Vaughan Human Rights Award. She specializes in clinical counseling, particularly for torture and trauma victims. She has significant experience in Jordanian refugee camps. Currently, she is a specialist child protection advisor for cowed children in Western Australia. Previously coordinated a female genital cutting mutilation program and developed training on domestic violence for cowed communities. Carol consults on forced marriage and trafficking for the Australian Federal Police, and is recognized internationally as an expert in honor-based violence. She's also a 2020 Churchill Fellow. She studied family violence among migrants, resulting in widely implemented recommendations. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Carol.
Thank you to Ishar for inviting me. I feel very honored to be here. I'm here in the role as I wear several hats, so I'm here with my Department of Communities hat. I'm currently acting in a specialist role in Mirrabooka, which is the only cold specialist role for the department in the state. But before I start, I would like to acknowledge also the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting on, the Wajak Noongar people, and pay my respects to the present, past and emerging leaders. Also, as a refugee and migrant woman myself, I feel extremely honoured to be living on this safe land. I'm of Palestinian background, and with what's happening back in my home country, I feel honoured and somewhat guilty to be living in absolute safety at the moment. So thank you for welcoming us here. So before I delve into the topic, I'm going to look at my clock because I only have 30 minutes. Yep. This is a very complex topic, and I can't just go in and talk to you about what forced marriage is before giving a contextual background, because it doesn't sit on its own as a standalone topic. Why Bella read my biography, and some of you may wonder, why speakers or why people do the work that they have gone into. And my passion has always stemmed into human rights, coming from a family with significant intergenerational trauma and refugee background. And I'm also a daughter of, my grandfather is a survivor of the Armenian genocide. So he's one of 2 members of his family where he witnessed all his siblings and members being massacred in the genocide. So that trauma lives with you. It runs in your blood. And since a very young age, I knew in a way my privilege, being a Middle Eastern woman, where my family allowed me to study and be educated and have a voice. And the more I did so, I realized how privileged having a voice is, even though we may take it for granted on a daily basis. But it is one of the biggest privileges that we can have. So with that voice, I decided to dedicate my life and my career to domestic violence, which ended me in the area of honor killings and honor-based violence, and that grew into looking at all aspects of honor-based violence. And I don't like it when people say you're an expert, because I'm always learning. But I do think I'm the only one in Australia that does the honor-based violence spectrum. So it's a big responsibility, but it's also an honor to be doing that. So forced marriage is a form of honor-based violence, but let's start from the roots. Often in Australia, we look at family and domestic violence, and we lump everything into that basket. So a lot of people come and say to me, oh yeah, forced marriage is a form of domestic violence. Actually, the answer is no. The right terminology is that forced marriage is a form of honor-based violence. And I'll get to that in a minute. So my assumption is that you all know what forced marriage, domestic violence is. It's an abuse of power. It's not an isolated event. It's ongoing and purposeful. And it's used to intimidate and instill fear. But the majority of us here, when we are exposed in our work to domestic violence, the systems that govern us, the way we screen for it, is very much looking at this problem from a very Western-centric perspective. So what happens when we do that is that we then do not screen for specific forms of violence, such as forced marriage, female genital cutting, mutilation, dowry abuse, and so on. So then we miss a lot of people that have this lived experience or have had the experience run in their families. So domestic violence in migrant and refugee population groups looks very different. So on top of the power and control wheel, what we have is other forms of specialized violence, such as using documents, visas, or like I've come across many cases with someone sponsoring a partner here on a marriage visa, but then that person basically becomes a servant, into servitude. That's actually a form of human trafficking and modern slavery. And it's also a form of domestic violence. They use what we say that sexual assault or sexual abuse is a form of domestic violence. In cult communities, that looks a bit different. We call it marital rape. The notion of consent in many cultures is not something that is regarded. So once someone is married, they are objectified. There is an expectation that occurs. There's also a significant amount of reproductive coercion that occurs in the context of family and domestic violence in the cult communities. Reproductive coercion is when basically a woman does not have the right over her reproductive system and is coerced to fall pregnant. And I've come across many women whom I've worked with where if they keep falling pregnant with a female baby, they are forced to abort in extremely traumatic ways until she falls pregnant with a male child, because that's what is expected, that's what's wanted. So there's many forms. Now, you might be thinking, why am I putting fruit? And I often change the fruit to make it quite seasonal or exotic. But basically, when I say to you, what's the similarity between those two things? What is the similarity? They're fruit, right? I used to say fruits, then I recently learned fruits is not an English word. So they are fruits. But there's no other similarities, really. They look different, they taste different, the texture is different, but they belong to the same family. And if we use that analogy, it's actually exactly the same for family and domestic violence. Family and domestic violence in refugee and migrant communities has very little in common to what we as caseworkers or case managers or stakeholders are trained to perceive with our own, we're trained to look at it from policing, judicial, working with children, NGOs, from a very Western-centric perspective. So therefore, our policies, our systems, they only recognize it in that term. When I did my Churchill Fellowship, they have, in Scandinavia, for example, which are like a dot compared to Western Australia, the size of the countries, they have like 3 honor-based violence refuges in each of these countries, right? They have honor-based violence screening tools. Every person in police, every person working in these communities is trained to work in, my professor just walked in who supervised my PhD. Hello, Samina. Yes, that warms my heart. Yeah, so so one of my recommendations coming back from the Churchill Fellowship, and I'm still fighting to get it done, is to build the first Australian honour-based violence screening tool, which will look at screening for forced marriage and all these types of violence. So then I'm jumping a lot because of the time constraints. So this is something I usually offer in a whole day. I'm doing it in half an hour. So it's hard. So the literature in academia completely changes when we talk about these topics. They're no longer domestic violence. They're called honour-based violence. That's the proper academic terminology. So one of my friends and colleagues, Aisha Gill, who's like the guru internationally in this area, I'm very proud to have published a paper with her and met her again in London when I went last year for Churchill. She defines it so succinctly and says that honour-based violence is differentiated from other forms of domestic violence on 3 grounds. A, it occurs within a framework of collective family structures, communities or societies. The way we look at domestic violence in Western culture is from a very individualistic point of view or framework. We don't take into consideration the collective impact that may have on this victim survivor. And the services that are tailored for perpetrators or victim survivors are tailored and built or architected in a way where it is very individualized. That does not work when it comes to cold individuals. Secondly, it involves a premeditated act which is designed to restore the societal construction of honor as a value system, norm or tradition. So if you think about forced marriage, it doesn't just happen like this. It's a premeditated act. And a lot of the times, the parents or the family that arranges the unionship, they don't see it as a form of abuse or a form of harm. That it is sadly very normalized in many cultures around the world. And you see that there are generations and generations in the same family where forced marriage is the norm. And often in those communities, they call it an arranged marriage. When I grew up, my parents always said to me, oh, we were arranged into marriage. And I remember in 2018, when I went to Jordan last, I actually was sitting with my aunt and my mother. And I started questioning about the nature of the marriages. Both of my parents are beautiful people. But the reality is that they never experience love. Love as we know or may think of what love is. they've never experienced the feeling of love. And then when I asked my mother, she said, well, if I didn't marry your father, your grandparents would just keep bringing one person after the other until I married. So I said, so really you didn't have a choice but to get married. You didn't. So how are you calling it an arranged marriage when the nature of an arranged marriage is enforced? Because it's an expectation that you have to marry as a woman. So with me not being married, I have dishonored every aspect of my family in many ways. And not having children is also a form of dishonor, and so on. I won't get into my own trauma. And then thirdly, it is based on men's putative right to control a woman's social and sexual choices with a concomitant perception of women as the property of men. Now, the research shows that as migration rates increase, the age of marriage of children decreases. Does that make sense? Why? Because families are scared that their children are going to become westernized, and they want to hold on to that level of control, so they force them into a marriage to ensure that their chastity or their purity is contained or maintained. When we talk about premeditated, female genital cutting, mutilation is a act that predates all religions. It doesn't just happen like that. It's a premeditated act, and it's the only form of honor-based violence that actually is perpetrated by another female. Often maybe the mother, the aunt, or an elder in the community. The same with honor killings. Honor crimes are never occur on a whim. They are premeditated forms of violence. So honor-based violence encompasses the collective identity. It's a symbolic and rhetorical construct whose meaning exists and is constantly contested. Honor basically, and shame is held in the female body, and the expectation is that it is guarded by the males of that family. Because women are seen as those types of violence have occurred anthropologically at the start of civilization, when the tribes as we know it today have started occurring. And what made the tribe really strong and honorable is the purity within that tribe, so the purity of breed, the strength, which is by numbers. The purity of breed is synonymous with the purity of women. So if a woman transgresses from outside of that tribe, experiences a sexual assault, or goes and falls in love with someone from outside that tribe, then that's going to reflect on the entire tribe as being an act of shame and dishonor. And that is where the notion of honor-based violence began, with forms of violence such as FGCM and honor killings and forced marriages, to ensure that women are contained, to ensure that women are controlled. So, a forced marriage is a marriage that is forced. That's simply how we define it. It's not simple. It's nothing but simple. Marriage, according to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, shall be entered into only with the free and full consent of the intending spouses. But the irony in this sentence is that young marriages or arranged/forced marriages are the largest form of honor-based and gender-based violence currently occurring worldwide. And it's not decreasing. It's on the increase. It's on the rise. Carla might give us some more data and statistics from nationally. So what is forced marriage? This definition is the UK definition. It's a very succinct definition. It is actually quite difficult to define it because it's not straightforward. There's a lot of intricacies around how we define it, because to really say that this marriage is forced, we often have to have a diagnostic manual. You can't just willy-nilly say this is a forced marriage. You have to be certain that the marriage occurred by force, which is why it is extremely difficult to prosecute it in Australia. It's something that is not really tangible. It's not like you find drugs on someone and then you've got concrete evidence. The evidence is really difficult because it's also so collective that how can you expect a young woman or a woman from the family to dob on her own family and then be completely estranged and shunned from that family, because that's what's going to happen, and probably have a fatwa on her head where as a result of that she will be killed in an honor killing, which I have acted as an expert witness on a matter, very contentious matter in Adelaide, which is exactly that. A refusal of a forced marriage, falling in love with someone not from the same culture, and an attempted honor killing. The young woman survived and was extremely brave to go ahead. And the 6 members of her family were prosecuted with initially attempted murder, and then they pleaded not guilty, so that charge was lessened. So there is a lack of consent. It's positioned as distinct from arranged marriages, but I contest this, which I'll talk about in a moment. So every year, about 13.5 million girls are married before they turn 18. Now, we don't know exactly how many of these fall within the category of forced and arranged, but from my research and my work in this area, I could confidently say about 80% fall within that category. And if 1 out of 9 girls will marry before their 15th birthday, what is that telling us? And those marriages, the first forced marriage case I ever consulted on, and that is before the legislation came into effect, was a 9-year-old child. At PMH, I was called to go into PMH. 9 years old, was forced to marry a 33-year-old family member. Here, in Perth. So forced marriage is a human rights abuse, is a form of the fruit basket. It is a gender-based violence, it is honor-based violence, it is child abuse, it's adult abuse, and it is a form of modern slavery. So every year, as I said, with the statistics, forced marriage ends childhood. Unfortunately, it is highly intersected with war. So in refugee camps in Kenya, Syria, in Jordan, we have the largest, one of the largest Syrian refugee population groups. Iraq. So with war, the number of forced marriages increase. And one of the reasons why that is because, unfortunately, refugee camps are not a safe space. I visited one, I partly lived in one. There is no refuge in a refugee camp. That is the reality of the situation. It's where the highest number of sexual assaults against women occur. And if a woman is sexually assaulted, that is a dishonor to her family. It's often that she is then forced into marriage to the person that assaulted her. When I did my honor killings in Jordan, I came across a lot of cases where a woman was assaulted. The family gives her 2 choices. You either marry the person who raped you, or we kill you in an honor killing. That is the reality of many people out there. So why does it occur when we talk about child marriage? It's the desire of the family to ensure that a girl is a virgin, as I mentioned, around the purity of breed at the time of marriage, especially in communities that consider it a virtue for a woman to be married as a virgin. Secondly, young girls are encouraged to marry older men with the expectation that he would act as a guardian for that woman. And the younger they are, the more children they can have, which increases the lineal blood of the family. A lot of forced marriages also occur where the girl or the woman is forced to marry someone within the same family. It's not uncommon to see someone married to their first cousin or their second cousin. And the reason why that is because they want to keep the inheritance and the money guarded, and the children within that same lineage, the same tribe, the same blood. That's another reason why forced marriages occur. Now, as I said, an arranged marriage is when technically, and how many of you have introduced your friends to each other in the hope that you would make them? Really, it's an arranged marriage, right? But then you'd leave them to their own devices. If they go on a date, they fall in love, that's the key word, love. What is love? Love is a culturally constructed term. When you talk about love in a Western context, it has a completely different meaning to love in a non-Western context. Love is a choice, but for other people, love is not a choice. Love is believed and enforced upon you, where you believe that once you marry that person, you will grow to love them. You don't love them, it's not like those butterflies and that feeling. Some people never experience that, but they say that love is a human right. But not all forced marriages are actually bad. Not all arranged marriages are bad or abusive. Some forced marriages are healthy. I mean, this is a very controversial thing to say, but that's the reality. But obviously, because of the nature of the marriage, because of that lack of equilibrium or power or control, there is the vulnerability for a forced marriage to be very abusive. So this is where the grey area occurs. And I used my parents as an example. Luckily, they're not sitting here. But I've said that to them, and they still deny it. So a marriage may begin as an arranged, but once you look deep into that marriage and you question appropriately the nature in which that marriage occurred, you will go into the forced. So we cannot just say, oh yeah, this is an arranged marriage. There's a very clear distinction, or there's a very muddy distinction. There isn't a clear distinction. In my experience, a lot of the women I worked with who tell me my marriage was arranged, and I started building a relationship with them, having a very trauma-informed relationship. The more I got into the nature of that relationship, there was nothing arranged about that marriage. It had every indicator that it was forced in nature. So this is something that should really be, if someone says to you, I was arranged into a marriage, you do not take that sentence lightly. Because that is their perception, that is their understanding, that is their terminology. Their terminology is not, I was forced into a marriage, because they don't understand a lot of the time that marriage is a human right. That being forced into an arranged marriage, which is the correct terminology, is not a human right. And that's why we don't see as many cases come forward because we are not trained to detect or diagnose these cases when we have to, because they exist in our community. They are happening every day. They are, and that is not an underestimation. So what are the roots into a forced marriage? It's financial, it's social. Now, if someone is found out, or the family finds out that they are not heterosexual, that is another reason why they force them into a marriage, and it's called enforced heterosexuality. So gender diversity or someone's sexuality is seen as a massive dishonor to many communities, and as a result then they force them into a marriage against their will. Child marriage and immigration is actually a route into a forced marriage. What that means is someone sponsors another party that to bring them here. They use the visa or they use the Australian passport into a marriage, which is really forced. The person comes here, they've never met. They may be family members. Or the other thing is immigration increases, or migration increases forced marriages, as I indicated before. So why do they happen? I think I mentioned, I'm just wary of the time. I'm not sure how many slides I've got left. So the explanations as well is to maximize fertility, economic survival, to protect girls, to excuse rape, and contemporary pressures. So meaning, if they're becoming westernized, it's about a mode of control and objectification. The spectrum of harm associated with forced marriage is child abuse, sexual assault, reproductive coercion, domestic violence, stalking. It intersects with FGCM and honor killings, and is a form of human trafficking and modern slavery, regardless of where they are in the world, regardless of the law as well. So, some of the links, My Blue Sky, it has incredible resources on forced marriage. They also have a frontline worker guide, which I assisted in writing with them, which is so comprehensive. The Department of Social Services has information. The AFP website also has information. Yes, I think I'm on time. So thank you very much.
Human Exploitation Community Officer, or HECO as we call ourselves. So a little bit about that is there's one of us in each state, not currently one in New South Wales, but we're working on that at the moment. And we are a new role under the National Strategy for Human Exploitation and Online Child Exploitation. So they basically identified a gap between education, training and prevention in those two spaces, and created this role to go out into communities and frontline people dealing with these two offences for us to educate, train and sort of inform about these two topics. So today I am just talking a little bit about the AFP involvement and the legislation in relation to human trafficking, and under that is forced marriage. So as you can see, human trafficking, or sometimes called modern slavery or modern day slavery, is an umbrella term that we use, and those are seated under section 270 and 271 of the Criminal Code Act Commonwealth 1995, and it relates to all human trafficking and slavery-like crime types. So you see on the right hand or your left hand side, you've got your slavery-like offences, which includes slavery, servitude, forced marriage, forced labour, deceptive recruiting and debt bondage. And on the other side you have trafficking in persons, which includes child trafficking, organ trafficking and harbouring of victims. So the AFP is in WA the only investigating agency for these human trafficking offences. So our friends at WA Police, they do not investigate these matters, it'll be a referral to us. Carol mentioned earlier about honour-based violence and some of these falling into the honour-based violence space. Again, that is not something that we investigate. If there's honour-based violences containing state offences such as sexual assault, normal assaults or any kind of family violence, that again sits with the state police, not with the AFP. However, if there are any of these offences within that scope, we will investigate those matters, and that's sort of the line where we sit with the investigations. So what is human trafficking? So it is the physical movement of people across or within borders by coercing, threatening or deceiving them for the purpose of exploiting them when they reach their destination. That is a lot of information, so I'll break them each down very quickly for you. So across or within borders, so that basically means it can be interstate, overseas, or it could quite literally be suburb to suburb. So we could move someone from Bentley to Cannington. It does not have to be, you know, a lot of people think that it's interstate or overseas, but it can be within the same state. And it has to be the physical movement of that person. So if we lived on the same street and they moved somebody from number 27 and they've moved them to number 64, that is still considered the physical movement across or within borders because it's within the state still. By coercing, threatening or deceiving them, it does not have to meet every single one of those three. It could be one, it could be two, or it could be all three. So as long as it meets one of those thresholds, then it's considered within the legislation of human trafficking. For the purposes of exploiting them when they reach their destination, so they have to have that intention when the person reaches that destination that they are doing some sort of exploitation. So we were talking earlier about sexual servitude matters, domestic sexual servitude matters. So if somebody has brought their spouse over from another country, they're now put into a domestic servitude situation and they had no intention of that person to be their spouse or treat them as their wife. Instead, they've put them into a slavery-like offence situation where they're doing domestic servitude. The purpose of that was obviously for them to be in a slavery situation and not to actually be a loving husband, wife, etc. So they have to have that purpose of exploitation when they reach their destination. So forced marriage. So as I said, the slavery and slavery-like offences sit under 270 and 271. Our forced marriage sits under 270.7A of the Criminal Code Act 95, and that's the Commonwealth Act. So marriage is considered forced if, because of the use of coercion, threat or deception, as we mentioned earlier, one party of the marriage, the victim, entered into the marriage without freely and fully consenting. Now, that can also be both parties if we refer to children. So I'll get to children in a second, but we'll break that down again. Entered into the marriage without freely and fully consenting. Dr. Carroll mentioned that earlier about free and full consent, and that is part of our legislation, is that free and full consent over an arranged marriage and a forced marriage is that free and full consent of the parties that are involved in the marriage. Marriage is broadly and inclusively defined to capture a range of marriage and marriage-like relationships. Quite a mouthful. So the legislation covers marriage-like relationships to cover cultural ceremonies and religious ceremonies as well. As an example, nikah ceremonies are also included in that. What is not included is engagements. So in the legislation, it is marriage and marriage-like relationships, but it is not included in engagements. So that is something that obviously needs to be worked on, is that when we've got two young people, let's say 15 years old, and the parents have said, no, they're just promised to each other, they're engaged, they're not actually married, that is not something we can investigate. We can educate them then and say, well, you cannot marry them, they're children, you can't force them into the marriage. However, if they're engaged, we cannot pursue a criminal investigation on engagements at this point in time. It is not in the legislation for us to be able to do that. An arranged marriage is not a forced marriage unless it fits the description above, and that's where we sit in that grey area of what is an arranged marriage and what is a forced marriage. Do we see that full and free consent? What is going to happen to that person if they didn't consent to it? And that's where obviously we have to investigate that and see what evidence we have to prove that it was in fact a forced marriage and not an arranged marriage. Children under 16 cannot consent to marriage, therefore it is deemed forced. So in Australia, you can't get married under 16 anyway. You can apply for a magistrate if you are between the ages of 16 and 18 to be married with a magistrate's court order. If you are under 16, you are deemed to have automatically been put into a forced marriage because you are not of the age of consent anyway. So if we have, as is mentioned before, two 15-year-olds and then they've been engaged, then they're forced into marriage at that age at 15, it is already automatically deemed a forced marriage, and that would be something we would investigate. Some statistics for you. So this is the current financial year, 2022 to 2023. So it's increased by 100% over that financial year. And a lot of the increase can be down to a couple of things. One, we are all free travelling again. And the last one for that was the 21-2022, and obviously our borders were all funny with COVID and things like that. But also people are starting to recognise that this is an offence in Australia and people are reporting more to us. I'll just bring your attention to the bottom one though that says there are approximately 4 undetected victims for every victim detected based on our statistics. So 1 in 4 are reporting. So that's a lot that we aren't getting through as well. So our biggest one is down here in the green, which is forced marriage. So that was out of the 340 reports, we had 90 were forced marriage. So that equals to about 26% of our reporting is on forced marriage. And our secondary is over here with sexual servitude. So some of the barriers that we have for reporting, for us specifically, for being police officers, is the language barriers and the cultural differences. We find that the reporting to us, they have that fear of police and the fear of what's going to happen to them if they come and report to us. So they have the fear of the police, the fear of what's going to happen to them within their community, within their family life, the threats from the people that potentially have trafficked them in to be in these forced marriages as well. A big one is they're not aware of their rights here in Australia as well. Some of the countries people are coming in from, forced marriages, as Dr. Carroll said, a forced marriage is what happens. It's just part of the culture, it's just, you know, what their families have done, it's what their sisters, their brothers, their cousins have done. And so they're not aware that in Australia they have these rights to say no and to say, I'm not doing that, I'm not going to be in this situation, I'm not going to be forced into a marriage. So that's probably a big one, is not aware of their rights, that they can come talk to police and they can notify to us that it's happening. So what we do as the AFP, so at the moment we are in WA, as I said, the only investigative agency for human trafficking and slavery. In some of the other states in the eastern states, there are some state police that are doing some of them, like Brisbane has some protection orders they can issue that have forced marriage under it now. I know New South Wales and Victoria are sort of starting to look at more legislation under their state offences as well. And in Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria, they actually have dedicated human trafficking teams. Here in WA, we just have an investigations team with trained members in human trafficking like myself. So when a report comes in, it goes to a specific team here in Perth, and they are all trained in human trafficking and able to investigate the matter. So our role is a very victim-centric and victim-based approach. The team here in WA are amazing, if I do say so myself, and very sensitive and very culturally sensitive, and everyone puts their heart and soul into these kinds of investigations because the reporting, we know how difficult it is for people to come and report, so there's a lot of empathy obviously from our investigators on these specific topics. So once someone has reported to us, we have the Support for Trafficked People program, which is what Red Cross are going to talk about shortly. At the moment, the AFP is the only agency that can refer to the STPP. From my knowledge, there is another one coming in June, July, which again I think Red Cross will talk about, but we are the only agency that can. So any modern slavery or human trafficking related offences, we're the only people that can refer to this program for support, accommodation, counselling, and I'll let the specifics of that for the Red Cross, but it's going to be wonderful to have another agency on board able to refer to that program as well. Just so that fear of having to report for police and having another agency to report through, I think we'll find we'll end up with more victims coming forward, which would be amazing. So our investigation response, so it's very individual. We treat every case by case basis, and I have not worked on one that is almost done. This is the last slide. I have not worked on one that has even been remotely close to the previous one that we've worked on. Everyone's situation is different, how they've reported is different, and there's agencies that we receive, like child protection, hospitals, things like that, have mandatory reporting for things like this to us. And as I said, we are very victim-centric, so our main goal is prevention and disruption. If we can disrupt it from happening, then obviously that's going to prevent another family member from coming into one of these situations. So basically what you can do, if you hear of something happening in the community, we have our switchboard where you can contact our Western Command like directly through, or you can go to our main switchboard. The other way is Crime Stoppers. If you don't want people knowing that it was you reporting, then you're more than welcome to go onto Crime Stoppers and do an anonymous report. It will still make its way to us as well. And we are also, everyone in our office is more than happy for people just to pick up the phone and call us and ask us questions. So, thank you so much.
Speaker is Carrie Ann Larson. She's the acting state manager at Red Cross, and she will be talking about the migration support program.
Before I begin, I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land that we're meeting on today, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay my respects to their ancestors and elders past and present. It is such a privilege to be meeting on this land today. So I'm just going to give you quite a short presentation today about our Supporting Trafficked People program, which we will shorten to STPP because it's quite a lot of words in there. So the STPP provides health and wellbeing support to individuals identified as victims of human trafficking or slavery who are assisting the AFP in investigations into trafficking offences and those subjected to forced marriage. STPP is delivered Australia-wide. Red Cross provides 24 hours a day, 7 days a week and 365 days a year national response. And all referrals to the program come through the AFP. And as was touched on earlier, there are works for another referral pathway through an NGO underway. We don't know exactly what this will look like yet or when it will be implemented, but it will allow people who do not want to engage with the AFP to be referred into the program. So now I will go into what support is provided. So a caseworker provides tailored case management support, and support may include the provision of or referrals to essential items such as food and toiletries and clothes, accommodation or housing support, health and welfare needs, counselling, education and training services, financial assistance, legal and migration advice, and links to community supports. So we provide financial assistance and accommodation assistance. Initially, we can also pay for a hotel or crisis accommodation and work towards a long-term solution. We refer out for services such as counselling, migration and advice, and education and training. We also refer clients to Anti-Slavery Australia for legal advice. The financial allowances can cover and contribute to general living costs, psychology, healthcare and education. Clients' children can also be supported under the program with a dependence allowance and new baby allowance and assistance with school enrolments, advocacy, etc. So we also have an out-of-hours on-call support. STPP response is available in all states and territories, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, including public holidays. Now, this on-call support can provide grounding and containing someone when they are in distress, assessing safety and risk, engaging local emergency services and agencies, engaging and or providing information on local resources that are available, arranging access to emergency items, food or transport, arranging or booking safe accommodation, and liaising with the AFP and responding to new referrals. So the service also offers a 24/7 on-call support for existing clients and new referrals. The on-call is managed by an STPP caseworker and team leaders. So there are different support streams. So there's the justice support stream, which is ongoing, the intensive support stream, which is 90 days, the forced marriage support stream, also 90 days, and the transition stream, which is 20 days. AFP make the decision to transition the clients between the streams, except for the forced marriage stream. The forced marriage stream is not dependent on the involvement in the justice process. The transition stream can also be extended for up to 40 days for extremely vulnerable or complex cases. The different streams have access to different financial allowances. So for example, there's short-term accommodation for the intent support stream and household setup for the justice support stream and the forced marriage stream. Clients can leave the program at any time that they choose. There are also post-exit check-ins that are completed at the 3 to 6 and 12-month marks, and some additional financial assistance and support is available for specific needs at those times. So in regards to the forced marriage clients, the forced marriage support stream was established as an ongoing part of the support program back in 2019. Clients of this stream have access to the same support as provided through the justice support stream. To access the forced marriage stream, the potential client must be assessed by the AFP as being reasonably suspected to be in or at risk of a forced marriage, not willing to participate in a criminal investigation, and agree to receive further support. The decision to move on to the FM stream, exits and exit timeframes are all determined by the Red Cross and the client in conjunction with DSS. All forced marriage clients receive an automatic 90-day support before choosing to either exit or go onto the justice support stream if eligible, or go onto the forced marriage stream, then proceed to the exit stream. Sorry, I feel like I've said the word stream a lot in the last couple of minutes, so I do apologise. The next slide is a testimonial from one of the clients that was supported. I won't read it all out to you, but it is really amazing to see these testimonies come through and know that the support that we are giving is making a significant impact on people that have gone through such horrific circumstances. I'll just give you a minute to read through that before I end. So, as I said earlier, I am not the lead of this program. She was unable to be here today. So on the next slide is her email address. If you have any questions or would like to know any more about this program, please feel free. It's really tiny, I've just realised, on the screen, so I do apologise. But I'll also give it to Ishar that they can send it out to everybody that attended today. So if you have any questions or anything that you would like to know more about with this program, please, I encourage you to reach out to Eleanor. Her phone number's up there and her email address is up there, and that can be distributed as well. I would like to thank Ishar as well for having me today. Thank you very much. I was just chatting to Dr. Carolyn Kyler and saying what a privilege it is to be a part of this event. So thank you very much to everybody. I really, really appreciate it. That's all from me. Thank you.